to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. Do you wonder how your faith fits together with your profession? Well, join us as we explore how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Well, hello and welcome to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of Christian Veterinary Mission. My name is Barry Schwenk. I'm a pastor, a veterinarian, and your host as we explore the intersection between faith and veterinary medicine. To be honest, it's really easy to miss a very significant aspect of the ministry of CVM globally. If you were under the impression that all CVM does is use veterinary skills to share the love of Jesus Christ around the world, you would be close. Close, but not quite all the way there. It is definitely a significant part of what we do, but veterinary medicine is simply a door. And on the other side of that door is something far greater. And today I wanted us to kind of get a glimpse of what is on that other side, a huge part of the CVM family and CVM ministries. And so what I've done is I've invited former long-term CVM field worker to Bolivia, Heidi Janecke, to talk with us about what's on that other side. I feel like I was talking really fast, Heidi. How are you today?
I'm okay, thanks. Thanks for having me today.
I feel like I probably need to get this disclaimer out right away. You are not a veterinarian, correct?
I only sleep with one.
That's about so. So it's Bill is the veterinarian. How did you all meet and how long have you been married now?
We'll be married in July for 40 years.
Congratulations. So
Thank you. Yeah, I always brag about it. And I know, and when I meet young people or young couples, I always say, and it just gets better and better. Just hang in. It's better and better.
It hasn't been a cross to bear. It's been a blessing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I love my husband. My husband's amazing. I when I met him, I was like, this guy's amazing. And so I just pursued him like a dripping faucet until he said yes. I broke his arm. And I asked him to marry me like 50 times. He finally said yes. So whew, I win.
Smart
sucker.
Man.
What a sucker. Yeah.
So did you all meet before vet school, after vet school, during vet school?
Yeah, we met in college. I'm a couple of years older than him, but everybody would testify I don't look it. So yeah.
If they're smart, right?
Yeah. So, but Bill's a couple years younger, and his dad was a professor at the small college that I went. I ran away from home when I was 18 to go to a tiny little school in the middle of Iowa. It's my first cross-cultural experience. I grew up outside of New York City. The nearest McDonald's in Iowa, this is how I judged things when I was 18. The nearest McDonald's was an hour away. I'm like, holy cow, I am in the middle of nowhere. You take a left and that's where you go, nowhere. But it was a wonderful experience for me. I was a big fish in a little pond for the first time in my life, and it made a huge difference. I really loved it. And so Bill was going to college there because he got to go to school free there before he went to vet school. So we met at college, and then like I said, I browbeat him, and he was started veterinary school, and we got married while he was there, and I supported him through school. I had a good job, and we lived in Ames, Iowa, which is where the Mecca is, Iowa State. And that's the vet school just on the other side of the Mississippi. That's famous.
Go Cyclones. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so.
So,
actually, yeah.
Let me ask you this then, because so you all were of your 40 years being married, how long were you in Bolivia then together?
17 years.
17 years.
Yep.
So
we left with our children when they were 10. Holly had just turned 10 the week before, and David was 8.
Wow. Okay. So, wow, that all these questions just flooded in my mind all of a sudden. So let me ask this then. Was when you all met, was missions kind of always a thing that you all had been talking about, thinking about, or how did the decision to serve internationally kind of come about in your marriage?
Yeah, well, you'd have to fast forward through a whole lot of stuff. There was no going to church together or anything like that until we got our first. Bill got his first job in Kenosha, Wisconsin, was on Lake Michigan, just between Milwaukee and Chicago. And we moved into this place. As dumb vet students, we had a multitude of animals.
Yes.
And so nobody wants to rent to stupid people with lots of animals. So we ended up finding a really kind of trashy house that needed lots of work to rent. And we rented it. And the neighbors next door invited us to church. Actually, they invited us to a baseball game. And I sat next to a pastor. So I didn't know anything about, churchy stuff.
Right.
And I was kind of like, this guy's cool. He's funny. He's good. So I started going to church and I just took off from there. And Bill had always grown up in the church, but it was more of a tradition in his family to go to church. Everybody in town went to church, all his friends went to church. And so he had a lot more background. And then I just, I just like was asking crazy questions, like who's this Jesus guy and what's going on, man? This is awesome. And that's where we stayed until we left for Bolivia. It was in a First United Methodist Church in Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Wow. That's that's interesting because there are probably a lot of folks out there that are listening that think about this idea of missions and even coming to faith and realize, and the more I talk to people, the more I realize that everybody's story is so unique. And when Jesus calls, whether it's through a baseball game or, or whatever it is. When he calls, you got the opportunity to respond. And that must have been kind of a huge transformational kind of time in your life. How fast was that from the time that you kind of started going, he started going back to church, you guys were kind of together in that before the idea of then serving missions became at the forefront?
Yeah, I would say, within a couple of years, we were very active in that church, very, very active. We were also infertile, and so that was a big problem for us. And that was a thing that I struggled with a lot. And I learned so much from the mature people in my Bible study and Sunday school classes. And I didn't grow up in a Christian home, and so I had a lot of I'll just say we had a lot of fun and dysfunction at our house, but it was not a great environment to learn how to be a parent. So I watched people, and I learned, and God blessed us like 6 years later with a little girl who changed our world.
Wow.
And we were very involved with church, but then I had to leave my really well-paying job and my company car and was a stay-at-home mom. I was like, oh my gosh, be careful what you wish for. It's like, oh my gosh, this is really hard. If you ever want to know how selfish you are, you just have a baby and it tells you right away.
That's right.
So I did some more things, like I started a mom's group because I needed it. And so we did Bible study and different things, and it was really fun. And we both got really involved in a subcommittee thing about leadership, and that changed our direction quite a bit. It really changed our outlook on who Jesus is and how important he was to us and how he was our priority. And Bill just plugged along. He was at a very big practice. And I would say he became a little bit discontent there because the focus was all about money. And so there's two bills, my bill, another bill, and we called the other bill Dollar Bill because that was what he was interested in. And Bill just got I don't know, got a little bit sad. His happiest day of the week was the evenings on Friday nights when he would be the director of a homeless shelter at our church.
Oh, wow.
And that meant a lot to him. And so that was something that really engaged him away from veterinary medicine and more into community and serving others and the need of others. And so a few years later, he gets this idea. Of course, he doesn't tell me because he's a chicken, and that he's interested in doing that overseas stuff. And we have never, our first mission trip, Barry, I'm not advising anybody who's listening to me. Our first mission trip was the one we went on and stayed 17 years.
Wow.
Yeah, that where fools rush in, that was us.
Wow.
So
hopefully you packed well.
Yeah, that's a whole nother story, all the stuff you think you need. But yeah, so he finally told me that he wanted to do that. And I was like, after I had just gotten a new dishwasher, my first dishwasher, I'm like, we just got a new dishwasher. I'm not gonna live in a hut. I'm not built for a hut. And about 15 minutes later, I'm going, my husband is like Abraham Lincoln. You would never distrust him for anything. He's a man of integrity. So when he says God has really put this on his heart, then I would believe him 110%. Yeah. So about 15 minutes later, I was like, okay, we could probably sell the house in about 8 weeks, or at least move. And And I was calculating all the things that we had to do. And so I was in. I had no idea what we were in for, but I was in.
Yeah. Little do
I'm
you
a
know. I mean, like
I'm a leaper.
yeah, no, you're going to go with both feet and you're going to hope the water's deep enough to to catch you. So what was you mentioned you had a really good paying job and oh so what was it that you were trained to do and what prior to then stepping into the full-time mom role, what was it that you were doing?
I worked for pharmaceuticals. I was
Okay.
executive pharmaceutical salesperson for 7, 8 years. One in Iowa with Pfizer and one with Bristol Myers in Wisconsin.
Okay. All right.
And so, yeah, all the perks that came with that, and
Yeah.
it was great. But that didn't like. I'm a jack of all trades. I had a nursing background. I have a psychology degree.
Mm,
I have a variety of things, but my passion is art, and it always has been. But as my growing up in my age, I was not allowed to like even
right.
venture into going to be an artist because that's for like rich people, and you need to make a job. So
Right.
don't do that.
It was always, oh, that's what you're going to do as a hobby. Now, what are you
Yeah,
going to do to support your hobby?
yeah,
I understand completely. I understand
yeah.
completely.
So when
So,
my kids were little at home, I would paint and I would sell my stuff, or I would barter with people. I painted a lot of murals, did a lot of
mm,
stuff.
so that like in some ways kind of prepares you because like, maybe your ability to leap in with 2 feet, um, you kind of have that a little bit of that comfort knowing that whatever it is that's on the other side, that you'll be able to adjust to it and in some way or another be able to connect. Is that generally how you live in most of your?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not afraid of crossroads.
Yeah,
I mean, I wouldn't go to Iowa for nothing, right? I mean, it's like
that's right.
I didn't know what I was getting into, but
Mhm.
I flourished. I married my husband, and I flourished.
Mm,
We moved around a lot. I changed jobs and became a mom. I flourished.
mm,
So I'm not afraid of change. I think the challenge is I learned something. You know,
mm.
if it's a mistake, I learned something. But if it's good, it's like, wow, thanks God, it's awesome.
Well, that's a good question, or lead into the next question, which is how much does your faith play a role in your ability to do that?
Yeah, I believe yeah, I trust God 100% with my life. I have since I was quite young. I didn't without going into a whole bunch of my own background, I just accepted that I needed God in my life when I was
Mm.
about 10 or 11. But 10, 11-year-olds don't drive themselves to church, so
Right.
I never got to go to church, but I learned a lot about faith through another way, and it worked out that I was able to trust God with my future. And then when I went to church, it was like, oh, now I'm putting the pieces together. Makes sense. So this is because I was raised kind of a nominal Catholic, and it was in Latin, and
Mm,
we would go late to church, and we would keep the quarter, pick up the
right.
newspaper, buy candy, the end. So
Yeah.
my background in church was pretty nominal.
Mm. But then that all kind of evolved and changed because now you find yourself in this new situation. You get reintroduced to church, maybe in a new way, and then out of that growth and connection to the church, this call to missions kind of emerges. So what's that next step then for you and Bill as you're thinking, okay, this is something we're gonna do. You've already kind of in your mind started to think 8 weeks, sell the house, whatever. But what's that next step going from we're called to let's move on that call?
Yeah, well, like I said, we were at the Methodist Church, and two of our pastors happened to serve in ministry. One in Bolivia for a
Well,
long, long time. Who they were both thrilled that we were both interested in that, and they directed us to go through Global Missions, which is the branch
mm,
for missions in the Methodist Church. And Bill was all in because you don't have to deputate, and deputation means it's scary because you have to ask people to
right.
help you get to the field. And that can be terrifying for somebody like him who has always been a giver, right? Not a taker. So that is kind of was comfortable for him to
Mm,
figure that. So you fill out the application, blah, blah, blah. Long time goes by and nothing's happening. I was so frustrated because they lost our application. And but Bill would go to these conferences like in Florida and whatever and see the CVM people and knew about CVM, but he didn't even consider it because he knew that required deputation.
Right.
And that's not something he wanted to do. And so just tell God what you don't want to do, right?
That's exactly right.
And it became clear that this stalling that we had with this direction, and they didn't have a veterinary job set up at all. It was going to be something they'd have to figure out. And then I said, well, just call CVM and find out more about it.
Mm.
And I can see him sitting in our little tiny kitchen table, and he's got the phone with the cord on the wall. This is
Right.
back in the day. And I just see his shoulders just relax.
Mm.
And there's this countenance just kind of changes.
Mm.
And I'm gonna stand in the kitchen just looking at him. I don't know what's going on the phone, but I could tell that whoever on the other end of that phone is praying for him.
Mm.
And I think it was Kit.
Yeah.
Might have been Kit or it might have been Brad, but it was one of those two. And I think it was Kit. And you could just tell it's like, yep, this is what we need to do.
Mm.
So, and CBM just like was so easy to work with and so lovely. Very glad to have us on their roster and helping us get through all these things, answering our questions. And you tell you, the money thing, that whole thing became so much easier. Like we were gone after waiting all that time. I think we were gone within a year.
Wow.
Shocking.
That's
Because a
great.
lot of people take a long time to get their funds
Right.
raised and stuff. But when they explain to us, this is not about you, this is about God and what he wants to do and share this ministry for people who can't do it themselves and want to help. So when you put it in that perspective, it kind of makes sense. And so the people at church, even though they have their own money to give to their mission, they supported us. And because we had been involved in this other activity through the church, about leadership, we had lots of contacts with all kinds of churches in Wisconsin, and we got to speak at lots of places and made lots of friends. And yeah, it worked out good. Even the things like at his the shelter, other Christians through that shelter would invite us to speak, and we were in the field probably within a year. It was
Wow.
great.
Well, it's almost as if like God knows how to time things out. Is that kind of like even the where you end up moving, the connections, the growth and the motivation, the mentoring, the discipleship within the church, and just being kind of open and available to that. When Bill started talking with CVM, um, what was your initial thought? I mean, as a non-veterinarian talking with a mission who kind of has that V right in the very middle of their name. This is a veterinary mission. What were your initial thoughts about CVM, and then what were your initial interactions with CVM like as a non-veterinarian?
Well, by that time we were married a long time already, like 15 years or so. And so I know how to be Bill's wife and support. So, and I had 2 kids. So wherever we would go, I know God would give me something to do because you don't have, I mean, I did it in Kenosha where I lived. I was very involved, and I just figured that's going to be the same thing. I'll find something to do because that's what the plan was.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk with you on the podcast. And I have, right now during this conversation, I think I wanted folks to kind of get a little bit of your story, but part of what I want to get to, and it may have to happen in another in another episode, is I really want to talk to you about then down the road about how God used that doorway of veterinary medicine to kind of open up a lot of other things. But that let me ask you this before we get to that point. So for anyone listening, you're just gonna have to tune into the next one to get to that point. I'm sorry, but there's a lot I want to ask you. Let's talk about that. So that deputation time, your preparation for the field, and I would, in some ways, the way that Bill was preparing for the field may or may not have been entirely the same way that you were preparing for the field, both spiritually, emotionally, physically. I mean, your role as I appreciate when you're saying like you learned how to be supportive of Bill prior to, during that deputation time. What was that time like for you? And what were the big things that God was doing and preparing in you so that you could make this transition to this new season of life?
Um, well, both my parents were gone by this time, and so that made it easier for me to leave on my side of the family because I'm the baby of my family, but Bill's the
Right.
oldest. So for Bill, we had the only grandchildren at the time.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Or I guess maybe not. We had the first grandchildren, but we were taking grandchildren away from his family. We were very close to his mom and dad and his sisters, and so that's probably the hardest part was saying goodbye to family. And we had no objective as to how long we would be there.
Mm.
17 years was not on our radar.
When you signed the contract, it didn't
No,
say
no, no, no,
13
no. It
years.
was like 3 years, 3 or 4 years, that was it. And like, yeah, and we'll come back and we'll buy another house and
Mm.
figure it out.
Right.
But yeah, so you're right, the prep one, you have to like get rid of your stuff.
Right.
And so you start to go through like baby clothes. You're like, I'm sentimental in the sense
Right.
that this, we were infertile, right? So every little outfit that my grandmother or my mother had bought, I'm saving it like a little squirrel in a box and putting the label on it and bringing it up to my mother-in-law's house to store. But after a while, like it's really easy to get rid of stuff and because you get more stuff.
Right.
And we found that out, you know, 17 years later. Stuff. We got a big house full of stuff down there. We got
Right.
all that big stuff down there. We got this house 4 years ago, and it's full of stuff.
Right.
So, I mean, I think you realize that it's just stuff, right? And where your home is where your family is. And so, if I'm with Bill, that's my home.
Right.
He's my heart and my children. And so, there were some scary things. I had some weird dreams.
Mm.
That something dangerous was going to happen to my children because we had, I think CVM sent us to Seattle to give us a little pep talk and get us kind of prepared
Mm.
and to start the deputation process and teach us some things like that for a couple weeks. And then we learned more about Bolivia. We had a couple of options of where to go. We chose Bolivia because we thought it would be easier for us to learn Spanish. The other option was Nepal. And I don't know. And you had homeschool. Neither one of us would look at each other going, oh, no way. So they had a mission school we were going to go to. And we thought that would be good for our kids because we were concerned because, they grew up in this little house in Kenosha. It's their first house, only house.
Mm.
And that's where their roots were and their friends. And so to uproot them and move them, that was always in the top of our mind all the time, worried about that. But they were great. My kids were great.
Good. I was to say, so they were the kids because you said they were how old, 10 and 8 when you left?
Well, when we started all this, they were probably 8 and
Okay.
5.
Okay.
By the time we actually got there, 10 and 8 or 7, something like that. It's been 25 years ago. I can't remember.
How were they about during that time? Because I mean, there's most kids kind of feed off of their parents, and you all of a sudden you got all this transition and all these things that are happening. How was that deputation time for them?
Um, they were kind of funny because we had to go to churches together as a family, and so as they got older, they'd be like, "You didn't say that right." And your
Yeah.
kids do that. A deputation, you have like a little spiel and you're trying to say
Yes.
it, and they're like, they got a little sick and tired of all that church stuff, but going to different places to visit. But I think they were really young and they just didn't put a whole lot of pain and suffering into the thought of it
Yeah.
until like the last week when my daughter sitting in her bedroom crying. There's no furniture in there. She's sitting in the corner crying. And our son was like, "Hey, this is cool. We're on an adventure." So this is very different, but she was great. I mean, I was the one crying all the way there on the airplane
Yeah.
because I was scared. Yes, I didn't know what to expect because I was like I said, I'm not built for a hut. I'm a city mouse. My husband is a country mouse, and I was like, how's this going to work? But we were going to a very large city, so that was comforting to me. It's 2 million people in Santa Cruz, Bolivia. And Bill's work would take him to the country, which you could be in the middle of absolutely the rainforest in an hour.
Mm.
So it's very rural around that area. So the best of two worlds for me. I'd get to stay in the city, and he'd get to go
Right.
do his thing out in the middle of nowhere.
So that meant that in anticipation of going, the thought process was, Bill had this veterinary kind of focus on what he was going to do. And your role at that point headed, like while you're crying on the airplane, you're thinking, I'm going to support Bill and to keep my kids alive. Was that the?
Yeah, and to find out what I'm going to do, right? I don't have that much trouble making friends, and so I didn't have too much worry about that. We neither of us spoke Spanish, so we had the plan was to take 6 months to learn Spanish, get a tutor, take classes, do all that stuff. And Bill had no experience for 15 years in large animal, and that was going to be what he had to do. So that terrified him. So we had a friend whose brother was a vet in our town who had a mixed practice, so he went out to make sure cows were still built the same way they used to be. All the parts and pieces are still there, and
That's right.
And the thing is, when you go to a rural, developing world, it is the beyond basic sort of stuff. I mean, teaching people the difference between a vaccine and a antibiotic, and they teach you in CVM how to do things like, well, people don't speak, they can't read. So you can't like give them text to read. So you had to learn different ways to educate. And that's what he just flourished at. He was a wonderful teacher. And that was, as a trainer of trainers, that was his calling. And he really just, and just loved it. He just was really, really good at his schoolroom was a big old green Land Rover with a piece of paper on it. And, and he can do anything. You give him a string and a Land Rover, he can do anything.
That's a unique set of skills. Well, so I appreciate you sharing some of this background. And I know when we started this, I think I mentioned to the folks listening that we're going to have to come back and continue this conversation. Because what I'd like to talk to you about next, and when I say next, I mean in this next upcoming episode, I want to talk to you about the focus, on the plane headed to Bolivia, and the expectation versus the reality of what you found when you got there, and then the transition of ministry. Probably within that first 5 or 6 years. I think that's really important to talk about. And for folks that are listening that who, if you are a non-veterinary spouse and you're wondering, we thought about missions, but I don't know what I can do. I think that your story is going to be really important for them to hear, especially the intentionality. And I appreciate you sharing just how that place in your life where you're willing to jump in with both feet and kind of trust God to take care of you and to lead you where you're going. And I think for everyone who's listening, if you can appreciate that in Heidi's story and maybe even find some of those places where God's calling you to jump in with both feet, maybe together we can learn how to live well at the intersection of two roads crossing.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Two Roads Crossing, a podcast production of the Christian Veterinary Mission. If you were blessed by this content, like and subscribe so that you are alerted when new content is released. If you would like more information about CVM, or if you have questions, comments, or topical suggestions, you can find us online at www.cvm.org. Or you can contact us by emailing podcast@cvm.org. God has a plan for the nations, and that plan includes you. We pray that CVM has encouraged you to live out your calling with confidence and competence. So, until next time, may the voice of the shepherd ring loud and clear as you follow him in faith to the intersection of two roads crossing.